Yeah, I just wanted to start by saying thank you. Because, yeah, thank you for your time, most
Yeah.
important. And I wanted to basically start by asking you the big question: what inspired you to start PhD Balance in the first place?
Yeah, that is often the big question. And it's kind of interesting, right? Like there's always so many different pieces of why you do something. And I think it was a combination of a bunch of different things, but it all really came down to reading this Nature Biotechnology paper in February of 2018 that found about 40% or so of graduate students were dealing with signs or symptoms of anxiety or depression. And I read this paper and I was kind of surprised, but also felt kind of relieved of realizing that I wasn't the only person. And in fact, there was a huge number of us because I had been dealing with depression and anxiety for a long time in my graduate program. I had a really hard time the year before. And that's the other thing I thought about is I was like, I wish that this study had been done earlier. And I started looking into it and realized, oh, there's been studies done for decades. We just aren't talking about it. And realized that some of the issue was even looking at the 40% number, I would still go into lab or go into conferences and sort of think like, well, not these people. You know, everyone in here is doing fine, but it must be people somewhere else. And it was that disconnect between the numbers and the actual understanding that it's the people around us, it's the people who are successful, who are also the ones who are struggling with these things. And really started PhD Balance. It was actually originally PhD Depression because I'm a PhD student with depression. I thought that maybe a few hundred people would share their stories and we could support each other. And it turned out there was a huge need for people to share and to learn from others. And it's really taken off from there.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I've had a look at the website, and it's a fantastic resource of just and did you expect it to take off the way it has? And did you expect people to make those kind of contributions to it?
No, absolutely not. So uh, I anticipated maybe there would be, one or two stories a week for a little while, and then it would peter out. But really, it would be hopefully this exercise for myself and find some other people online who'd be willing to talk about it. I think if I had known how big it was going to get, there's no way I would have actually started it. Now that it's happening, I'm super thankful, and it's absolutely the most fulfilling thing that I get to do. But certainly, if you had told me about 2 years ago, it started in the very end of March of 2018, that all of this was going to happen if I made this Instagram account, I am sure I would have not created that account.
So, just out of curiosity, you started your Instagram account, and then it just kind of snowballed into the website as well. Is that how it worked?
It got some momentum, which got me excited. At first, it was just myself running the Instagram account, and then people brought up, oh, there's a lot of people on Twitter who do a lot of this conversation more so than on Instagram. You might want to consider having a Twitter account. And at that time, I sort of had a Twitter. I think I had like 89 followers or something, and I avoided Twitter as much as I possibly could. And so when I decided, okay, Twitter would be a good thing, I realized I didn't want to do it. And that's the first time that I brought somebody else onto the team. And her name was Mona. Mona ran our Twitter for about a year, I think, before she graduated and moved on to just an awesome job. And she's amazing. But with that, it sort of became a team venture, and I saw the value of learning how to delegate pieces. And a few months later, realized that I needed more help with editing people's stories. People would send in stories, and I'd have to edit the whole thing. And, it took a lot of time. It took a lot of emotional work, and ask for editors. So it's been a lot of iterations. I think our website came on a lot later, and the new version is created by Diana Klatt, and she did a really amazing job and just did great work, which has been so useful. And I think what's been really great about all of this is that there's now a really big team of people working on it. And more than just making it an easier workload, what's been happening is that we get so many different perspectives, right? That with this big team, it's not just one person's vision. And because this is supposed to be a community platform, I think that that makes the entire thing just better overall.
I found it, like I said, when I went through the website, I found it so inspiring that people could be so honest about their mental health struggles, because it's not something that most people are comfortable discussing on a public platform. And I noticed in my experience that it wasn't the case even 4 to 5 years ago, that people are so comfortable about being open. What do you think has changed now that people are willing to come forward?
I think there's a few things. Um, It's a good question, but it's definitely true. If you talk to faculty members, they'll tell you they didn't even hear the term work-life balance, right? That no one was talking about the importance of just mental health, much less talking about the influence of mental illness. I think that once you realize that the people around you might understand, it makes it a lot easier to speak. And for every person who speaks, multiple people hear that, and they then feel able to speak. And I think it spreads quickly like that, where you don't need everyone around you to be speaking about it. But if you hear one person, you might speak, and another person might hear that person. And I do think that social media has helped a lot, because there is something to be said for, it was much more comfortable, and it's much more comfortable for me to say something on Twitter than to say it to my colleagues. Of course I can talk about these things with my friends, yeah, but it's not scary to talk about having a bad day in lab even to the internet. But it definitely can be scary to, if you were going to talk to your committee advisor and say, I had a really bad day in lab and I think all my experiments are failing. I think it's the same thing with any difficult topic.
Yeah. Just since we're on the topic of Twitter, so sometimes Twitter is a really good way to kind of, vent your feelings, and people are usually quite positive when they respond, from what I've seen. But you obviously always sometimes have the odd person who comes out with something super negative because they can, since it's Twitter. How do you, deal with that? How do you respond to that?
So I had a conversation with somebody about this today, who's also on Twitter, and he also has um, over a few thousand followers. And it was this discussion of, you can have a tweet that goes out that gets a bunch of likes, people are commenting, they're sharing, and there's, 1 in every 100 is somebody who says just something kind of mean. I am lucky because for a lot of different reasons, I'm not a person that most people want to attack on social media. It's just not really a good look to attack people in the mental health space. Usually they have other people who are supporting them. Usually hopefully most of the things that they've said have been supportive of others. If that's not the case, they're doing something wrong. But I think that the important thing is to just acknowledge that it still hurts. Yes. Instead of being like, well, I shouldn't care about this. This is silly. I shouldn't mind. And it's like, no, it still hurts. And I think also because people say things online that they would never say to you in person. And yeah, it's just a couple little things, but the truth is that I could go out in the regular world and spend an entire week just sort of chatting with people, and I probably wouldn't have any of them tell me to my face, like, you have no right to be speaking and you should really consider never talking again. That's not going to happen in real life. And so it's normal to have that happen on the internet, and it's normal to just say, like, ow, that really hurt my feelings, and to honestly put the phone down. Yeah. I know that sometimes I have times where I'm on it constantly, but for instance, I'm working on my dissertation right now, and it's really easy to get distracted. And so I deleted the Twitter app from my phone. I don't have any notifications on. So I check Twitter twice a day, check Instagram a little bit more frequently, but it should be a positive experience. And if it's not, the cool thing is that you get to be the one to decide what your experience is. Also, I definitely block and mute people if they are making my life worse by what they're saying.
Yeah, it's not worth giving them time and effort if it's affecting you mentally, on top of everything else, right? So just to kind of change lanes a little bit, I personally know a lot of people who developed mental health problems over the course of their PhD or postdoc, and obviously there's something wrong with the system if it's causing people to develop problems. So what do you think needs to change with the system in the first place?
I think there's a couple things. One is that, so at least from the stories that we've gathered, it seems like most of the time people report that they had signs of mental health concerns beforehand, either in their high school, college experience, or maybe they talk about a family member who'd had the similar thing. So I don't think it necessarily, I just want to make it clear that it's not necessarily causing the mental health issues. And I like how you phrase it, of like developing these issues, that I think that's really what it is that there's some latent predilection or something, some predisposition towards dealing with mental health issues. And this is really a pressure cooker, right? We look at things that will promote people's mental health, and those are things like a strong community. Those are things like feeling that there is a purpose in their life, feeling that there is an autonomy in their life, and feeling like that there is hope for their future, that if they put in a certain amount of work, they will expect a certain amount of reward. And all of those things are inherently lacking in academia. And I think all of them can actually be addressed, right? And the first thing that we have to do is just get over ourselves as scientists, as researchers, and just accept that we are humans at the heart of it. That human psychology is a real scientific study. That's a real field of research, and they have found across the board, what are the things that motivate people to work? What are the things that make people feel lonely? What are the things that help protect people against mental illness? And instead of saying, well, I'm a scientist, I'm smarter than the average person, I might be better at doing microbiology. I hope I'm better than the majority of people at doing microbiology after doing it for 10 years. But I'm not better than other people inherently at other skills. And so I think that just having that ability to say, these are the pieces that generally make people healthier, and where are they lacking, and how can we institute changes to specifically address those? And I think I bring this up because I do also, one of the things that still comes back to me now, because I'm not done with the mental illness. I wish I were, and people on the internet especially will say, like, how did you get done with that? And I'm like, that would be great. I would let everyone know. But it's still something that I think about, of like, I've been doing this work for so long. I know the best care practices. I know all these things. I know what my triggers are. And still, I have a really hard time. Shouldn't I be smarter than this? And just giving myself that empathy of saying, I'm a person just like everyone else. And nobody is a textbook perfect human 24/7.
No, that's absolutely right. And I think being smart has really nothing to do with dealing with mental health. That's a completely different, you can be like the smartest person on the planet, but still struggle, and that's absolutely fine. Since we're on the topic of change, and what do you think universities are doing? Do you think they're doing enough to support people with mental health issues?
I think they're trying. I think that it's at least in a positive turn. So I think more universities are at least acknowledging this is a problem. Right now I'm getting frustrated with universities taking a year to do a full climate study on their students, and then surprise finding that between 20 and 40% of them are dealing with these issues. We found this across universities. Yes, these climate studies should be done, but you don't have to assume that no one has depression. You don't have to assume that it's a zero until you see that 27%. So I think that there's a little bit of space for universities to get a lot better as far as, again, that humility of our university is not perfect. The people in it are not perfect. The practices not perfect. Let's learn from other universities and what they're doing. I think some schools, like one of the ones that gets pulled out all the time because they're just doing a great job is University of Michigan, and their Rackham Graduate School. And that one stands out because there are a lot of universities in the US, which is where I am and where I'm more familiar with, that have strong mental health programs for their undergraduates. But Rackham Graduate School is one of the main ones that has really, over the last decade or so, transformed its services for graduate students. And I think that that is really where universities are lacking right now, is understanding that master's and PhD students have very different needs, have very different problems, and also have just different access than undergrads or than medical students, which is where we see most of the resources going right now.
Oh, I completely agree. It's kind of a similar situation in the UK. And sort of what I noticed is, because I did my PhD at a fairly big university, but not quite Oxford or Cambridge. But then I moved to Oxford to do a postdoc. And I noticed that the university that I did my PhD in supported people much better. I think they talked about it more. They had bigger committees, and they actually did more to. They did a lot to support undergrads, like you said. It's the similar trend in the UK. But then they kind of started talking more about supporting PhD students, and it was a more kind of open environment. Not so much in Oxford. I think it's still the prestige of, the University of Oxford, and you just have to like hold it in and deal with it rather than getting support. But hopefully that'll change in the future.
Yeah, I think it will. I think that, it seems to be also a very generational thing. And another nice piece of social media is that, I mean, for better or worse, the internet exists kind of forever. If you put something out there, you don't know when it's going to come back. And so let's say it's not generational. Let's say that this is something that once you hit the level of a PI, you never want to talk about it. You never want people to know about that. First of all, we know that that's not true, because there are amazing PIs, primary investigators, out there talking about it, making these changes. But more of the older crowd might not be. But the thing is that as these generations move up, you already have people who have spoken out publicly. You already have people who have made that really hard step. And had they not publicly, maybe they wouldn't when they got into a different position. But hopefully that they've already seen the benefit of talking about these things. Other people have already built communities with them. And I think through that upward movement of people who are talking about these things, people who are really invested in supporting each other, that's where this change will eventually come. I hope it happens sooner than that, and I think it will. But that's the sort of thing that, even when things aren't going well in that sphere, I still believe that it's going to get better.
Do you think that there's obviously a gender disparity between men and women reporting mental health issues, or like being willing to talk about it? Do you think that's coming down now in the 21st century, or?
I don't know if the ratio is changing. That's a good question. I know that like people are talking about it more in general. So that, discussing that basically women tend to deal with depression, anxiety at a higher rate than men, but men are even less likely to report it, right? Or less likely to talk about it openly. And you also see that in even the online spaces. I think I don't know if the ratios are changing, because I know that both women and men are speaking about it more. But it's really cool to see there's some great different institutions that are specifically targeting men, which I think is so important, because breaking down those barriers about what it means to be successful, what it means to be a woman, what it means to be a man, what it means to be whoever you are. I think it's so important to break those base gender roles that we have originally set. And if we get rid of this like hyper masculine version of what it means to be a strong person, and rather understand an amazing leader often has super high emotional intelligence, which at the very least requires that they understand mental health. Understanding and seeing that strength in empathy and in emotiveness and in just general emotional intelligence, I think will help more people to come out and talk about these things, and in turn won't make it something where it's like, oh, you're not manly if you talk about this, or like, oh, well, she's just being a woman and complaining, all of which is just, it just doesn't help anybody in the end.
No, I think I saw an article somewhere that said something like 45% of men, or so, I can't remember the statistic exactly, so I don't want to quote it, but like a lot of suicides are predominantly men who suffer from depression or some other mental health problem, and they just can't deal with it because they're kind of trained to hold everything in and not talk about it, which is really quite unfortunate. But again, I hope that also gets better fairly soon. Again, kind of going back to the universities and the support, because I kind of got distracted with the whole gender, the gender. It's so obviously we were talking about how you can develop mental health problems over the course of your PhD or postdoc, but again, staying with that, doing a PhD is very stressful, and doing a postdoc is also quite stressful and can exacerbate existing mental health conditions that people have. And sometimes people don't get the help they need because you stop taking care of yourself because you're so stressed. What would you say to people to encourage them to get the help that they need?
I think that a lot of times we don't get the help that we need because we are so stressed. We have so little time to do so much. And I guess there's two things. One is it will make you more productive in the end. You can look at, people ask me sometimes of like, well, how do you have time to run PhD Balance? And I'm probably doing more now than I have any other year in my life. And I'm still at a much better place mentally now than I have been in the past, because I see a therapist every other week, and I take medications, and I see my psychiatrist who prescribes those medications at least once a semester. And all of this is an investment of time, but it is amazing how much time you lose if you're struggling with a mental illness.
Yeah.
And I think that word is very important, of struggling or carrying. I sometimes think about it like that, of it's just this weight that I have to carry. And you think about it like that. Let's say you were carrying a dumbbell, right? You have this weight and you're carrying it, and you have to run a mile. And at the start of the mile, you can either take 30 seconds to run over and put this weight down and then run your mile, or you don't take that 30 seconds and you run the entire mile with a weight. One looks like it is wasting your time. Everyone else is taking off and you're going to be 20 seconds behind them, 30 seconds. But we can look at that logically and say, well, if you're going to make up that time. You're going to make up that time by investing a bit of time at the start, because of course, and that's the same thing with mental health, that you have to find it within yourself to trust yourself and to give yourself that benefit, that investment, and say, it's worth it to me. Ideally, it would be worth it regardless, but I'm a very type A person. I'm a very goal-oriented person. And so especially when I'm feeling like I don't have time for this, I don't want to go to the gym, or I don't want to see my therapist, or I just, I'll just sleep a little bit less. I have to remember, this is actually getting me closer to that goal that I want to reach. It just feels a little bit slower.
Yeah. No, that's actually really well said. And I completely agree with your dumbbell running analogy. That was really well said. Just on a day-to-day basis, what kind of practical advice would you give to someone who's struggling, just, when on a daily basis?
I think the most important aspect of my life now versus the times where I was really having a hard time was that now I have a bunch of different people that I know I can go to or text or call and just say, I'm not doing great right now. And they don't freak out. They don't, say like, oh, have you been sleeping? Have you been eating right? Well, you should be doing this, whatever. I have so many people in my life now who say something to the effect of like, that's okay. You're okay. How can I help? And having those people and building those connections, it takes effort. You have to, when you're doing well and you want to spend 10 hours a day working and you're like, I can just charge through it. If I work super hard now, then the next time I'm having a hard time, like I won't have to do as much and whatever. You have to cut out some of that time and build these relationships and build different other good habits of going to the gym, of going to sleep. But having that support system, and just being able, even if they can't help, just being able to say, hey, I'm having a really rough day and I feel really bad about myself and I don't know what to do. And having another person say like, yeah, that's okay. We all have those days. It's just made so much of a difference.
I think one of the barriers I think I personally sometimes have is getting over the inhibition of asking somebody for help, because in my mind I would think, oh, I'm inconveniencing them somehow by burdening them with my problems, which is a huge problem, because you shouldn't have to feel that way about asking for help. And what would you say to somebody if they come to you and say, oh, I don't feel like asking for help because I'm shy about it, or
I think to think about, my advice would be to think about how you feel when a friend comes to you, right? When someone genuinely comes to you and says, I'm struggling with this, I need your support. You don't feel burdened. If you're super busy and you can't help them, or you just can't help them for whatever reason, you'll want to find a way to help them, right? You'll say like, I can't help you, but let me get you some resources. Yeah, there's times when you can't say yes to helping someone, but having someone genuinely come to you and say, I'm having a hard time, I think you could help me. It feels good. We want to be needed. We want to be wanted. It's a very human thing. And it can sometimes be actually a very kind thing to do to ask someone else for help. It's actually, there's a weird like sales psychology trick of the best way to get someone to start to like you or start to work with you is to actually ask them for a very small task or favor, and then they can help, and it feels good to help, and they already are in that cycle of helping. And that's of course not what's going in here, but it's something that's so fundamentally human that it's used across like sales fields. It's used all over the place, of people genuinely want to help each other. And if it's a friend that you care about, you're going to be excited if you can help them. And so if somebody who, and I'm speaking like directly to right now because this is something I have a really hard time with, you can actually be doing a favor to your friend by saying, I'm having a hard time, I need some help. It also tells them that they don't have to worry when they don't hear from you about things that are going on, right? That I have friends who will tell me, I'm in a really dark place right now, or I feel like I can't leave my house. And that means that when they're not saying that, I don't need to worry about them. So I don't have to worry about them 24/7.
Yeah.
And I get the privilege of worrying about them and caring about them when they do need help. And to that point, I have some friends, and these people are just so awesome. The people in my life are amazing. And I have friends who I can just say, it's a bad day. I don't have to explain what's going on. They already know what's going on. And the reason I say that is that I'm at a point where I can't ask for help. I feel awful. I feel like a burden. I don't even know what I need. People will say, well, what do you need? And I'm like, I have no idea. I don't know. And so I have these friends where I can just say it's a bad day, and they'll ask a few questions. They might come over, they might bring food, they might say, come meet me at this place, or they might just say, thanks for letting me know. I'm going to give you a call tomorrow morning. So yeah, for anybody who has that fear, that's a super normal human fear. I think it means that, one, you respect other people's time. There's something to be said. Like, you're not like a bad person for being afraid of asking for help, right? That's super normal. But to just remember that other people are going to feel good if they can help you.
Okay, I never thought about it that way, actually. So that's really helpful. Thank you. And so just as this is the kind of the last question. So there are, there are always people, whether on the internet or sometimes on on a face-to-face basis, who tell people who are struggling, to just get it together and move on, which is the worst possible advice you can give somebody. But what would you say to such people to educate them? Because usually they just don't realize, that that's not okay advice to give to someone.
It's an interesting question. It actually reminds me of some questions that come up when I do social media training as well, but science communication training. So I'm actually trained to train other scientists to turn their science into hands-on activities with like general public. And I get those questions a lot there of, well, what if somebody comes up and they say climate change isn't real? They're a climate change denier. What do I do? How do I teach them? And the best thing that you can do in any of these scenarios is first be patient if you can. If you can't, that's okay. If you're at a place that day that you cannot be patient, get out. There are times on Twitter where people ask me or in person, and I am not at a good place to talk about it. I've had a long day. I don't want to deal with that. And I just sign off because no one's going to be helped. I'm going to feel bad. They're probably going to feel justified. But if you're at a place where you can keep your calm, the best thing to do is just ask questions. Just try to understand where they're coming from. Sometimes, and the reason for this is that maybe they'll tell you something that you can then give them options otherwise. If they say, well, my friend in high school thought he had ADHD, and then the doctors gave him a whole bunch of different pills, and it turned out it wasn't that. And so that's why we shouldn't worry about this stuff, is that doctors are just trying to give us pills. That tells you, this person is speaking from a place of they were probably really afraid for their friend, and they haven't learned anything new since then. And so saying something like, there have been horrible issues of overprescription. That's absolutely true. Things have changed since then. And it does depend on the doctor, the same way that a physical health doctor, some are really great. Some do things that add up to malpractice. Versus sometimes people, if you ask why they're saying it, you can pretty easily find out that they're kind of just trolls. They're having a bad day. They want you to have a bad day too. And lastly, I think this is true of any tricky situation, is that usually the people who are most vehement about it being totally made up are people who haven't faced some of their own demons.
Yes.
Doesn't mean, like, oh, all these people have a mental illness. No, like maybe it was a different situation, or maybe that they knew a friend who could be struggling and they didn't want to face it, or it could be anything, or maybe it's something totally different, but they're projecting. Usually people who are very upset about something, you're not going to get super upset about just everything in the entire world. There's a reason that they're upset about this, and it is almost 100% not you. They're not upset with you. They're upset with something, and they're putting it on you. So don't feel like you have to educate them. If they want to educate themselves and use you as a guide, that's your decision. If they don't want to be educated, you use that time to go do so many more amazing things. Because like we don't have enough time. Nobody has enough time for that. We barely have enough time to sleep. Like no one has time.
Yeah, absolutely. Actually, do you mind if I ask you one more question?
Please, yeah, go ahead.
Popped into my head as you were talking. So we've kind of talked about, the PhD being stressful, developing mental health issues, etc. But one thing that I think I've personally experienced, and unfortunately a lot of people I know who've experienced it, is bullying in the workplace, whether it's your PhD supervisor or your postdoc advisor. And that invariably, whether you're kind of predisposed to having mental health issues or not, it leads to, I know that me and a couple of my ex-colleagues suffer from mild forms of PTSD because of the bullying that we experienced. All of us have imposter syndrome. Would you classify those as mental illnesses, or is that like, how would you explain that? How would you deal with it?
Well, I think I try to think as much as possible as I can about mental health the same way I would physical health, right? Where if, there's different versions of being sick in terms of physical health. There's, I ate way too much ice cream and now my stomach hurts, I feel sick. Or I caught a virus from somebody. My face is congested. I can't breathe very well. I'm sick. And all the way to something like asthma that is chronic. It's a sickness, it's an illness. And so mental health is the same way, that every single person in the world, flat out, is going to deal with periods of mental health struggles,
Yeah.
right? Everyone is going to have something where tragedy hits, everyone's going to lose a family member, a loved one. There's going to be relationships that end. There's going to be, unforeseen issues with jobs, with kids, with pets, anything. There's going to be times for everyone where their mental health is at a bad spot, and the difference is that, is this chronic? So is this happening for more than 2 weeks at a time? Is this something that is recurring? Does it come back seasonally, or is there a history of it? Because I think, it's this huge sliding scale of what it means to be sick, what it means to be hurting. And I think that if we just focus on trying to improve, just, it's not a competition of who is struggling the most, and it's not a competition of who has the most intense diagnosis. It's, people will come to us and say, I'd love to write about my story, but I feel bad because all I have is anxiety and I don't have this super exciting story. And I think that that's the big problem, actually, is that we have this ideal version of someone with mental illness, and it's someone who is just barely able to function at all, and it's like dramatic. But mental illness doesn't normally look like that. Mental illness usually means that the person goes home after work and just lays on the couch and stares at the ceiling for 4 hours, or that that they're nervous before a talk, but what you don't know is that they haven't eaten for 2 days before it because they can't eat because they're so nervous. It's not this big, beautiful, dramatic movie of an illness. It's usually these small things that add up over time and just make you miserable. And in terms of bullying, I think that that's the same thing, where it's just going to be slowly digging away at your mental health. And it takes so much more energy to keep building up those pieces as they're chipped away. And I think the same thing with physical health is that it's a lot harder to get healthy than to stay healthy. And in terms of bullying, you have someone who is actively breaking you down. So you're going to have to put in more work than other people to just maintain your own health.
Yeah, I think fortunately, me and all of the people I know are kind of out of that environment now. So I think we're all doing better. But yeah, I see exactly what you mean. I think that's pretty much it for me. So, I prepared a list of questions, and I've kind of gone through them and bombarded you with a couple of other that were completely.
No, this has been lovely.
Thank you so much for your time.